Okay, in class 4, our in class 4 project, we're going to look at question 1. We're going to look at um, how unionizing, which is a monopoly of laborers, how a labor union affects a labor market. Before we do that, though, we're going to compare the monopoly union outcome to a competitive outcome, where there are many firms competing for workers in a competitive labor market, and there are even more employees in this labor market. So we have a model here. That is our demand curve because the slope is negative. This is our supply curve. The slope is positive. The axes here, this would be labeled W. This would be labeled E. This would be labeled S, and this would be labeled D. And the market wage, the market clearing wage, is the wage that the marginal worker in the marginal firm, what they agree upon, right? So I have the problem here in Desmos. I have it all worked out in this particular Desmos worksheet. At the competitive equilibrium, the market wage that the marginal worker and the marginal firm agree upon is $22.67 per hour. And at that wage, in this labor market, 373.333 people, workers, will be employed at this hourly wage 40 hours a week, right? So that's how I got these two numbers here. Okay, now we want to look at the worker surplus. Okay, so I open up our little PowerPoint that goes along with this discussion, and I have it graphed in the PowerPoint so you can see how your version of this problem should be graphed. Again, we have the wage on the vertical axis. We have E on the horizontal axis because this is the number of employees that are in this labor market. We have the downward sloping line labeled D for demand, and we have the upward sloping line labeled S for supply. We got these numbers from Desmos. The marginal worker and the marginal firm agree to a wage of $22.67 per hour. This results in 373.333 employees being employed in this labor market, all being paid this wage. So if they're all being paid this wage, then, and this is the labor supply curve, then this box down here, or this triangle down here, represents worker surplus. And then this, because firms are demanding workers, want to hire workers, this triangle up here, the upper triangle here, represents the firm's surplus, right? So that's firm surplus, that's worker surplus, and this is total surplus, right? And the competitive outcome is Pareto efficient because any outcome other than this results in a loss of surplus or efficiency. So this is the efficiency argument that a libertarian or a conservative economist might advocate for, right? Now in our problem, we have to calculate the worker surplus. And the worker surplus is this blue triangle, as I mentioned earlier. The height of the blue triangle is determined by whatever this value is. And in the labor supply equation, it's 4 right there, right? So it's 4. So the length of this line segment of the blue triangle is from 4 to 22.67. So you have to take that difference. And then the length of this line segment from here to here is the employment level, right? So if we go back to the problem, the project we're doing in class together, the firm surplus, the worker surplus down here, the worker surplus is the area of the triangle with this height right there and that base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that with the equal sign. I'm going to copy that into Desmos. And I'm going to paste it down here in an empty box. I'm going to name it capital W0 for initial worker surplus. And then I'm going to change the and base equals to, I'm going to change that to times. This is the area of a rectangle. We need the area of a triangle, so we need to divide by 2, right? So the initial worker surplus is $3,485.06, which is what I put right here, right? Now the firm surplus is the area of the triangle with a height equal to that and a base equal to that, equal to this value, the employment level, right? We've already talked about that, but what is this height? Well, the height is the 60 up here from the labor demand equation, 60 down to the equilibrium wage, 22.67. So I'm going to copy this into Desmos. I'm going to call it F0 for initial firm surplus. Again, I'm going to get rid of this and replace it with times. And then, of course, I don't want the area of a rectangle, I want the area of a triangle, so I got to divide by 2. Oh, I got one too many equal signs here. So the initial firm surplus is $6,168.26, which is what I have here, right? Now, the total surplus, right? The total surplus. So I got the worker surplus, I got the firm surplus. The total surplus is the sum of the two, right? I called this W0 and I called that F0, right? So let's go back to Desmos. So the cool thing about Desmos is I can just type F0 plus W0 and I get the total surplus. So that's kind of a cool thing, right? And I can copy that and put it right here, right? Now, before we move on, I want to talk about what the labor demand curve is, in my opinion. In my opinion, I disagree with neoclassical economists. I don't think of workers as these homogeneous blobs. When a firm needs to hire a worker or fill a position, what it does is it posts an ad, maybe on Indeed.com, or it posts it on LinkedIn.com. And then people apply for the position. Now, if you think about this person on the firm's labor demand curve, this person is the one that is considered the best candidate. This person down here is considered to be the least qualified candidate, or the worst candidate. And a lot of things go into the queuing people from worst candidate to the best candidate, right? A lot of things go into that, like what does their resume look like? Is it well organized? How well does it match up with the job ad? What about their letters of reference, or their LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter social media accounts? Do they seem like a serious person? Do they seem like a know-it-all, somebody that might be hard to work with? What might their credit rating be? So there's a lot of things that go into valuing the applicants, right? What classes did they take in school? What kind of experiences do they have? Have they had a lot of jobs that lasted a couple months each? Or have they had positions where they were at firms for several years? All that stuff is used to put workers in a queue for firms, right? Then the labor supply curve, the people in the labor supply curve aren't homogeneous either. Some might have 5 kids, some might not have any kids, some might be divorced, some might be single moms with many kids at home. So the people that populate the labor supply curve are different as well. And the way you think about the labor supply curve is this person here is willing to do the job for the lowest wage of everybody else in the queue. This person out here is willing to do the job for the highest wage in this particular queue here, right? From 0 to what looks like 625 employees in this queue. This person is looking for a pretty high wage. They're willing to do the job for $35, it appears. This person is willing to do the job for $4 an hour, right? Why might this person be willing to do the job for $4 per hour? Well, maybe they're desperate. Uh, Maybe they don't value their skills as much as they should, right? Maybe this person has an inflated view of their skills, or maybe this person was born into privilege. This person was born into poverty, right? There's a lot of reasons for people having different reservation wages, and you can place people in a queue from the lowest reservation wage to the person with the highest reservation wage, right? So if this person were hired, this person's more than happy with the market wage. The market wage, everybody gets paid the same wage, right? So this person's more than happy with that wage because they would have done the job for $4. The 100th person hired in this labor market would have done the job for just under 10, and they're ecstatic with the market wage of roughly $23 an hour. The 200th person hired would have done the job for about $14 an hour, but that person gets paid about $23 an hour, so they're ecstatic with the job, right? The 300th person hired in this labor market would have done the job for about 19, but they get paid again around $23 an hour. So that's why this triangle here represents worker surplus, right? It represents it's a measure of how much workers win in these voluntary exchanges between them and the firms that hire them. At the equilibrium, you have the marginal firm and the marginal worker, right? They're, at this point here, the marginal firm is indifferent between hiring that last worker hired and not hiring that last worker hired because they have no surplus. They're willing to pay the market wage of roughly $23 per hour. And that's the market wage of $23 per hour, right? The lowest wage they're willing to pay that last worker hired is roughly $23 per hour, right? So they're indifferent between hiring that 373rd worker or not, right? Same with the worker that is hired, the last worker that's hired, that 373rd worker that's hired. They could stay home on the couch, look for different work in a different labor market, or they could take the job for $23. They're kind of indifferent, right? So the marginal pairs, the marginal firm and the marginal worker are the ones that are kind of setting the price in this labor market, right? And everybody gets paid the same wage, right? Everybody that is hired in this labor market gets paid $23 per hour, right? And then when there's no workers working in this particular labor market, that very first worker hired, well, that firm would have probably paid $60 an hour, but they only have to pay roughly 23. So firms win too, right? The 50th or the 100th worker hired, firm, because labor is scarce and firms need to ramp up production, firms are willing to pay just under $50 an hour, but again, they only have to pay about 23. So again, firms win, right? So that's why this upper triangle represents how much firms win, right? In the voluntary exchanges of between them and the workers that they hire, right? The workers down here, or the workers along the labor supply curve here, they're not in the labor market. They could very well be in a different labor market, right? This person here would be willing to do this particular job in this particular labor market if the pay was $30 an hour. So maybe this person found a job in a different labor market making $3 an hour. So you can kind of imagine that this part of the labor supply curve has been erased because they're either at home playing Xbox or they're at a different firm paying their reservation wage that pays them their reservation wage. So the applicants who are on this labor demand queue from the equilibrium down to here, they're not hired because for the tasks that the job requires, these applicants' labor market skills are judged not to be valuable enough to be hired. So you can think of the line here as what firms believe these applicants' job skills are worth with respect to the duties and responsibilities of the opening that has been advertised, right? That's why the firms stop at this 373rd worker. Okay? All right. So let's just move on. Now, if the workers in this labor market form a union and their union hires econometricians to estimate the firm's demand for workers in this market, then the union can monopolize the labor market by having all the employees join its union. In this scenario, since the union's business analytics department has estimated the firm's maximum willingness to pay schedule, right? This is the firm's maximum willingness to pay. If business analytics and econometricians can't estimate this labor demand equation, then the union knows how much firms are willing to pay for different levels of employment, right? So you can think of the wage that its members get paid times the number of employees that the firms hire. You can think of this as the quantity that the union is selling, and they're selling that quantity at that price per unit. So you can think of this as the revenue of the union, right? Price times quantity. Now, because the econometricians and the data analytics people who work for the union have estimated the maximum wage firms are willing to pay at different levels of employment, you can actually substitute that model in for W, right? This right here, the labor demand curve is W equal to 60 minus 0.1 E, right? So we can replace this W with what W equals. So given a level of employment, how much are the firms willing to pay for that level of employment, right? And if you notice that this times E ends up making a parabola that looks like a football stuck in the ground. It rises and then it falls, right? It rises and falls. The zeros of that parabola happen when E is 0 or when this thing equals 0. When this thing equals 0, E is 600, right? So 600 times 0.1 is 60, and 60 minus 60 is 0. So when E is 0, when E is 0, the union's revenue is 0. When E is 600, union revenue is 0. So if the union was interested in maximizing the amount of funds their members collectively generate in employment, then they would choose an employment level of 300. 300 is the maximum amount of money the union can extract from the employers in this particular labor market, right? Because that's property of a parabola, right? It goes up, it peaks, and then it declines. And the peak of that curve is halfway between the zeros, right? When E is 0 and when E is 600, total revenue is 0. So this curve is symmetric, and the peak occurs halfway between 0 and 600, right? We're going to pull out a little calculus here. Let me turn on the calculus here. So when we differentiate this with respect to E, right? When we differentiate this with respect to E, I'm going to do a little calculus here. You want to do this for the test. But if we differentiate with respect to E, right? The coefficient of E right here is 1. We're going to subtract 1 from 1, right? And we're going to multiply this 60 by 1, right? And then we're going to subtract 1 from that exponent, and we're going to multiply this whole thing by 2, the old exponent, right? So 1 times 60 is 60. E raised to 0 is 1, right? So that's why this derivative here in economics is called the marginal revenue, right? Marginal revenue. So 60 times 1 is 60, and then E raised to the 0 is 1, so that's why this part is 60, right? 2 times 0.1, the old exponent, times 0.1 is 0.2. And then e raised to the 1, 2 minus 1 is 1. E raised to the 1 is e, which is why we have just e right there. So let's go ahead and erase all that. Okay. You won't have to do that in the class. I'm just showing you where this comes from. Now, does this marginal revenue equation make sense? Well, let's think about it, right? I'm going to draw the revenue curve over this graph, right? And remember what I said about total revenue, right? If E is 0, revenue is 0, right? So the green is going to be revenue. And then when E is 600, 600 times 0.1 is 60, and 60 minus 60 is 0. So we're going to have revenue at 0 if the employment level, if the number of employees in the union is 600, or if they're 0, right? And then revenue rises, right? Revenue for the union rises and then falls. It peaks out at 300, right? Whoops. It peaks out at 300. This is not a very good curve. Let me erase it, try it again. So the union has 0 revenue at employment level 0, which makes sense. And then it has 0 revenue at membership equals 600, because if you have 600 employees in your union, you plug 60 in the demand curve and the price is 0, the wage is 0, right? So let's do this. Let's see if I can draw this a little better. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, now where's the slope 0? Where's the slope of the revenue curve 0? The slope of the revenue curve is 0 at the peak, right? The slope here is 0. Where is marginal revenue 0? Well, at 300. So the revenue curve of the union peaks out when employment level is 300, right? And at this peak, the slope is 0 up there, right? So that's why marginal revenue passes through this point. Marginal revenue is the slope of this green curve. Where's the curve the steepest? At 0, right? It's steepest at 0. And then the steepness kind of wanes and flattens and goes to 0. So the green curve is the steepest here, which is why the marginal revenue curve is at 60 up here, right? The steepness of this curve is 60 at this point. Now, where is the revenue curve slope negative? Well, beyond the maximum point, the slope of the curve is negative here, right? So that's why when you extend the red line down here, they're all negative values, because the slope along this part of the revenue curve is negative. So the slope of the revenue curve is greatest at employment level 0, right? Steepest here. And it's the slope is 0 at employment level 300, because we're at the peak of the revenue curve. And then for every point beyond the peak, the slope is negative, which is why if you extend this red line down here, all the values, all the heights are negative, right? When I learned that for the first time, I thought it was the coolest thing of all time. Okay, so the moral of the story here is that the marginal revenue line in any monopoly model is going to have the same intercept as the demand curve, but it's just going to be twice as steep, right? It's going to be twice as steep, right? So that's the moral of the story. Twice as steep, 2 times bigger than the slope of labor demand, but with the same intercept, right? Okay. Okay, so let's look at this now. So choosing union membership level is done this way. In reality, they just negotiate, the union will negotiate above competitive going wage, right? They'll negotiate a wage that's above the going wage, right? In economics, in a monopoly model, the marginal revenue of the union and the marginal cost, um, they intersect at this point. So this right here determines how many union members this union should accept, right? And then, given that level of scarcity, it can charge a wage up to the firm's demand curve. So that's kind of how that works in economics, right? When you do the algebra of the monopoly model, right? So let's look at it in the PowerPoint discussion. Okay, so instead of hiring almost 400 employees, right? The union only admits 224, right? The union only admits 224. And that allows them to push the wage up to $37.60. Now, the problem with this is there are workers, right? There are workers willing to do the job at a much lower wage who might not be lucky enough to get into the union, right? So, without any protection for the union from the state, if the union can get the wage up to $37.60, at that wage, there's going to be about this many people looking for work in this labor market, right? So firms might just tell the union, you know what? There's a lot of people looking for work here, a lot of unemployed workers looking for work. We're just going to hire them at the competitive wage, right? So in order to keep this wage up here, the union might have to lobby the state, for example, Ohio or Michigan, for protections that allow the union to drive the wage up above the competitive rate, right? And those protections can come in the form of a law that says if the employees of a firm, if the employees of a certain trade at a particular firm unionize, all employees in that trade at that firm must join the union and pay dues, right? And that laws, those kinds of laws are called closed shop laws. So in states with closed union or closed shop laws, employees have to join the union, pay the dues, if they're to work at a firm that has been unionized, right? And this has been the case in Michigan, in places like Michigan and Ohio for decades, right? If if a union tries to do this in a right to work state, it's going to be more difficult because the employees don't have to join the union and pay the dues. So it gets more difficult in right to work states, right? In right to work states, the firm will end up paying closer to the market wage, right? Because at this union wage, there's a lot of people looking for work in this trade, and not everybody's going to be admitted to the union, to this union, right? At this wage, if you could extend the supply curve out here, there's a lot of people looking for work in this labor market at that wage, right? And the people along the labor supply curve from here down to here would not be employed or admitted to the union. Only the 224 people would be admitted to the union, right? So that's why a union needs protection from a state like Ohio or Nebraska, right? Because there's just so many people looking for work at that extremely high wage, right? Okay, so moving on. Now we want to do what? We want to find the wage that firms are willing to pay union members if the union can successfully limit the number of people in the labor market to 224, right? And the only way it can do that is if it can lobby the state for a right for a closed union shop law, and then it can admit its members and limit membership to this 224, right? Okay, so in a closed union shop state, if the union only admits 224 workers, then what's going to happen is this, right? So if it only admits 224 workers, which is the intersection of the marginal revenue of the union and its marginal cost, what will happen is if it can limit that number of people in this labor market, one through union membership and two through laws that force employees to join a union if they want to work at a particular firm in a particular trade, then it can drive the wage up to the demand curve. And according to my PowerPoint, it's 3760. So let's go to the Desmos. Whoops, we have to click on the Desmos link. Oh, I think we already did. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have the labor supply curve here, or the labor demand curve here. I have the labor supply curve here, but then I'm going to click on this circle here in equation 3, and it's going to give me the marginal revenue curve, right? It's going to give me the marginal revenue curve. Okay, so the intersection of these two gives me the number of employees that the union wants to admit into its union, right? 224. And then I'm going to set this x equals 0 to 224. And then I'm going to, and you can see this dashed line here, right? You can see this vertically dashed line. So, at 224 employees, in the union can negotiate a wage of $37.60, right? Let me just type that in here real quick into the Y, 37.6. Okay, here's the interesting thing, right? This is why the union needs to advocate for a law that requires anybody in a trade working for a company that's been unionized to join the union, right? At this union wage of $37.60, 672 people are going to enter the labor market to look for work in this labor market, right? But only 224 people are admitted to the union, right? So that's the reason why a law that compels membership in a union, that's why those are enacted, right? Because if it's a right to work state, what's going to end up happening is the union won't succeed because the firms can hire all these surplus workers who aren't in the union. They can hire them at the competitive wage. Okay. So what the unions have to do in partnership with the state is basically erase this part of the labor supply curve. They want to erase the labor supply curve from this point onward, right? And they do that with laws. Okay. All right, so we have the maximum wage that firms are willing to pay, $37.60, right? $37.60, right? They're willing to pay up to $37.60 per hour. Now, plugging that 224 into either marginal revenue curve or the supply curve gives us the lowest wage that the 224th worker would have done the job for, right? Let's go do that. So if we plug the 224 into either the marginal revenue curve, well, we'll plug it into the labor supply curve. If we plug that 224 into the labor supply curve, that 224th worker would have done the job for $15.2, right? They would have done it for $15.2. But they get paid $37.60. So this 224th worker who's admitted to the union would have done the job for $15.20, but is getting paid $37.60. So they have a huge surplus, right? That worker surplus is the difference between $37.60 and $15.20, which is why union dues can be pretty high, right? Union dues can be pretty high. if the union due is this difference, none of these workers on the labor supply curve up to this point will want to join the union, right? Because on net, they'd be getting paid below this, right? On net, if you factor in the union dues, right? So the people that get hired in the union are the people from here to here if the union dues are this difference, right? So if that is the case, you can think of this rectangle here to here to here. You can think of that rectangle as the union boss's surplus, right? The people that run the union get this box, right? You can think of it that way. If the dues are in fact this large. And I think the union bosses would have an incentive to want this big of a union due, right? Of about $20 per hour, right? So if they can get $20 per hour roughly, then this box ends up being the union boss surplus. And the union worker surplus would be this little triangle here, right? Would be this little triangle. And then the firm surplus would be this little triangle, right? Okay. So now we want to calculate. Oh, and the firms pay the 3760, right? So the unions, assuming the unions are successful at getting the state to essentially eliminate anybody in this labor market, make it illegal for anybody in this trade labor market to work in the labor market if they're not in the union, right? Basically, it bars them from offering their services legally in this labor market if they're not a member of the union, right? So that's how the firms can drive that wage up to 3760, right? Now what we want to do is we want to get the worker surplus. And remember, the worker surplus is basically just the trapezoid that I talked about, right? You can think of this rectangle here. If the dues are roughly $20, you can think of this rectangle here You can think of this rectangle here. If the dues are in fact roughly $20, you can think of this rectangle here as the union boss's surplus. And then you can think of this here as the surplus that accrues to the actual employees of the union. So both of these end up being the union surplus. You can think of this as union surplus, right? Okay, so let's copy that. We're going to paste it into Desmos down here. So you can think of this as union surplus, right? Okay, so I'm going to get rid of, I'm going to make that a multiplication. This first part is the rectangle, right? That first part is a rectangle. I'm going to do a plus here, and then I'm going to get rid of the stuff in between. And this here is the triangle, right? So I'm going to delete that. Then I'm going to replace this and base equal with times. And then this is the triangle, right? So I got to divide that by 2. So this is that lower triangle, and this is that upper rectangle, right? And then I'll call this worker surplus 1. So final worker surplus, right? So let's go back to our diagram here. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it, but there's kind of like a white line that passes between the triangle and the rectangle up here. If the union dues are this height, although this whole thing is the union surplus, right? The worker union surplus. If the dues are this height here, then this rectangle ends up being the union boss's surplus. And the worker surplus is this lower triangle, right? This lower triangle down here. Okay. And that lower triangle has a height. This 15.2 minus the 4, right? So this is 15.2 right here, and that's 4. So you can think of that lower triangle as, you think of this lower triangle as the workers who are lucky enough to get membership in the union you can think of that as their portion of the surplus. And then again, this up here is the portion of the union surplus that goes to the union bosses. Okay. All right, so where are we at here? Let's go to Desmos. So this is the union boss surplus, portion of the surplus that goes to the union bosses. And this is the portion of the surplus that goes to the workers from this point to that point, right? So worker surplus ends up, union surplus, worker union surplus ends up being more than it was before, right? And we don't, okay, so we that's why that's 672, right? Yep, okay, cool. Now firm surplus is that triangle here, right? That little tiny triangle on the top. So we'll go back to Desmos. We'll call this F1. So remember the firms, that very first worker hired, firms were willing to pay up to $60 for that very first worker, right? But then they had to pay the union wage of $37.60 right there, right? And then the base is the number of people in the union. And then because it's a triangle, we have to divide by 2. So firm surplus has shrunk a lot. Firm surplus has shrunk a lot, right? Okay. Then total surplus is the sum of the two, right? So we can just add W1, worker surplus, worker union surplus, and F1, firm surplus. Okay. And that's where we get this value right here, right? Okay. Now here are some interesting things. Let's go back to the union model, right? So we know this firm surplus right here. If 224 delineates the firm, the low-cost incumbent firm, the maybe less innovative firm, the big economies of scale firm, from the marginal firms, right? The firms with less scale, the firms that are more innovative. If this unionization combined with the law that prevents these workers from seeking employment, from gaining employment in this market, because you have to be a member of the union in this particular closed union shop state, then the marginal firms go out of business, right? The marginal firms go out of business, right? And if the dues go from this point down to this point, right, then the union bosses can take a majority of the surplus that remains, right? None of these workers will want to work in this labor market because on net, they're getting paid after they pay their union dues. That right there is less than what they are willing to do the work for, right? So all these workers leave this labor market, right? So that's kind of interesting because who's going to be then at the union, right? As a group, the people at the union are going to be probably the most desperate, the ones that maybe have the least amount of self-esteem. Maybe they grew up in bad houses. They went to not very good public schools. They don't value their work much on a per hourly basis, right? Because they're the ones that are in the union paying these dues here, right? These people here maybe value their work more, right? And as such, are only willing to work in the labor market if they're paid for that value, right? So they're off in another labor market, right? So that's kind of interesting. And neoclassical economics doesn't account for that, right? Think about the firm that survives unionization and the law, the closed union shop law that is imposed by the state that enacts it. Maybe this is why we ended up with General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, the big three for decades, right? Maybe those three firms, and I have no way of knowing this, but maybe those three firms were okay with laws being passed in the state of Michigan and Ohio and other Midwestern states that required employees to join the union in a particular trade to do that trade for a particular company, right? Because maybe for these laws, there were all kinds of small automobile companies throughout the United States, right? So maybe this law and the resulting unionization eliminated the competition for the big three. Maybe these firms here that are hiring these laborers here, maybe they're the big three. They have the economies of scale, right? And maybe these were independent car companies that went out of business as a result, right? And these are the employees that were working at those marginal firms, right? Those marginal car companies, the ones that didn't have quite the economies of scale as General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, right? So you can think of this right here, this red triangle. You can think of this red triangle as the incumbent economies of scale firms, right? The privileged firms, the big three, if you will. You can think that as their surplus, right? And to shrink the market down to the big three, I mean, I guess you could think of this rectangle here from the competitive equilibrium. You can think of this as this is the amount they're willing to shift from their surplus to the union boss's surplus for a less competitive marketplace in automobiles, right? Interesting. Things that make you go, right? Things that make you go, And if this is the dues, then the people down here have a very small surplus, right? They're still winning because they were lucky enough to keep their jobs at these firms, right? They're lucky to keep their jobs. But this person has no worker surplus if, in fact, the dues are represented by this height, this line segment, right? This person has no surplus, but everybody else has some worker surplus, right? Because after dues, this person has some surplus, the most of the unionized workers, right? So that's pretty interesting. And neoclassical economics doesn't allow for those kinds of discussions, right? That's why I like interpreting neoclassical models with Austrian principles. Okay, the last thing we have to do is figure out how much the union was able to raise the wage, right? So the initial wage was $22.67, right? The initial wage was $22.67. So we'll go down here. And the union wage is $37.60, right? $37.60. So the union was able to increase the wage $14.93, right? $14.93. Okay. Because it was able to eliminate 149.33 workers. Where'd that come from? Well, before the union and the closed shop state laws were enacted, there were 373.33 workers working in this labor market, right? And then the union was able to limit the amount of workers in this labor market to 224. So they're able to reduce the number of employees or number of workers in this labor market by 149.33. Right? That value. Worker surplus. Now, not all of it's going to the workers, right? Some of that worker surplus is going to the union bosses, right? So worker surplus, if I take W1 minus W0, worker surplus increased by this value here, right? 0.94. Right? It increased by that value. Firm surplus, right? Firm surplus fell by that amount, right? The incumbent firms are okay with it. The low-cost incumbent firms, the established firms, are okay with the law and the unionization because it eliminates the marginal firms, their competitors, right? The firms with the economies of scale, the cost advantages, can absorb these higher union wages, right? So the marginal firms are eliminated, right? The marginal firms here, the ones that don't have economies of scale, the boutique competitors, they can't afford these union wages, right? So they have to either leave the state or they just go out of business altogether, right? Or maybe they go overseas. Okay, so that's what firm surplus falls by, right? And then total surplus. I could go back up here and I can call this total surplus, right? And I can go back up here and call this total surplus. Okay, and then I can subtract T0 and T1. And so total surplus, this is the deadweight loss. Total surplus falls, right? Okay, so that's a labor union. That's a labor union question, right? So this question is actually sparking an idea for an article that I might write up here over the weekend.